Fun research topics. When I was a grad student, I had some fun research topics. I was researching, but my advisor had me kill the project. But I thought it was interesting, the psychological changes that a person goes through when you become literate. There are changes in your psychology, the way your brain functions. And you can see this in a variety of different ways. In archaeology, for example, a lot of prehistoric dwelling villages, okay, hamlets or what have you, little tribal enclaves, they will arrange their houses in sort of a random circular kind of structure. But once people become literate, they establish these right angles and these grids. And you can see it in Egypt, you can see it throughout ancient Greece, throughout ancient India, the Harappan culture. You can see literacy in the way they build their towns. So it really changes the way you think. So is it ethical to make children literate without allowing them a chance to understand the changes that their psychology is going to go through, that their brain, the way they think, is going to change? So is that ethical? Okay, that was one research paper I had. Another research paper I had was the Myers-Briggs type indicator, and studying how different types, different psychological types, approach composition differently and need to be taught in a different manner. Those were fun topics I had. But here's some other topics that you might enjoy. Okay, things that just came up to me recently, and I'm no longer a grad student. I've got kids, so I'm not going to be able to really dedicate the kind of time that I could when I was a grad student. Okay, here's a fun one. Okay, cabeza de vaca. Okay, cabeza de vaca, VACA, cabeza de vaca, was a conquistador in the 1500s who got stranded on the coast of Florida by his expedition. They had several ships, they had horses, had a lot of supplies, soldiers, cannon, what have you. Okay, they just ran into all kinds of problems in Florida because it's swampy, it's marshy. So they tried to get out of there, but their ships were destroyed, their ships were wrecked. So they built barges out of their ships and tried to float them across the Gulf of Mexico to Mexico. Well, a storm came in and blew the ships every which way, and nobody knows what happened to any of the ships, the barges that they built, except for Cabeza de Vaca, and a few of his companions washed up in Galveston, what's now Galveston. And they were enslaved, okay? And eventually they worked their way back to Mexico. But his experience at being a free, literate man and being enslaved is interesting because there's all kinds of similarities. I think you can find similarities with Olive Oatman. Was an American woman who became enslaved by Native Americans in the 1850s, I think it was, and a young girl, Cynthia Ann Parker, who was kidnapped and actually adopted by Native Americans. Okay, it's interesting the kind of experiences that they have. Free literate people who become enslaved and then find their way back to freedom. Okay, and of course, you can include in there the famous case, the 12 Years a Slave, of Solomon Northup, who was abducted by Southerners and forced into the South when he was a free African American man in the United States. And people thought he was a slave and took him and sold him into slavery. So his experience is exactly like those. A free, educated, literate man or woman, enslaved, kidnapped, forced into slavery, and then finds their way back into freedom, and they write about that experience. So those are three experiences over a period of centuries, okay? But they all take place in what's now the United States. And it'd be interesting because of the differences in culture. You've got a Spaniard enslaved by Gulf Coast Indians. You've got Mormon and other American people enslaved by English-speaking Americans, I guess, enslaved by different tribes of Native Americans. And then you've got an African-American man who's enslaved by Americans. Kind of a mirror image of the others. That would be a really interesting examination, I think. The way they express it, why they express it, why are they writing those books? What did they experience? How did they all get free? Are there similarities? Because they all took place geographically in the same area. In a temporal way, the time is very different. Century is very different. The technology is very different, and so forth. But their experiences, I think, are different. If you know somebody involved in biology, okay, involved in the sciences, here's a really odd one. I can't find the guy's name, okay, but I think it was in the 1930s. It might have been before World War I, but I think it was before World War II. This guy came upon this idea, and he was never able to research it because the war came along, and he could never get back there. But he saw white mice around the temple of Apollo, and he wanted to go back and explore that because Apollo was a guardian of mice, and white mice were considered sacred and were kept in these shrines, these temples of Apollo, all over the Mediterranean. So if you went back there and if you found white mice in one of these locations, it would be really interesting because it would show that these mice are a completely different genetic variant of mice. Or else they would have intermarried with native mice, and their albinism, their white fur would disappear in just a couple of generations. So that might be a whole new species of mice just waiting to be named and discovered in the Mediterranean there. Might be a very nice grant that you could get to go to a couple of different places in Turkey, in Cyprus, in Greece, is what I was thinking. See if you can find some white mice and do genetic studies on them. All right, well, hope I helped somebody out. It's fun keeping your mind open, even when you're in your 50s and thinking about that. That's one reason why I always liked doing research papers for guys that are in college. I never really did more than one for any one guy because, of course, I want them to develop the skills that they need to develop to pass college. But I do like to do one every once in a while just to see if I was in college, could I still do it? And so far I've gotten all A's with one B+. Well, take care, everybody. Hope you're having a good day. Bye-bye.